So I'm here to talk about principles of electronic warfare. What exactly is electronic warfare? It is any action involving the use of the electromagnetic spectrum or directed energy to control the spectrum, attack an enemy, or impede an enemy's assaults via the spectrum. In simpler terms, what electronic warfare is to deny the enemy use of the electromagnetic spectrum as a tool for attack, defense, or communication purposes. There's two basic types of electronic warfare. You have radar-based, which has been around since the 1940s, and infrared-based. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to focus on infrared electronic warfare. It's much simpler than radar-based. I think it'll suit my needs much better. Infrared or heat-seeking missiles, as you've probably heard them referred to, were introduced in the 1950s. They are relatively inexpensive to produce and can be launched from a variety of platforms, from airplanes, from ships, from tanks. And there's also a shoulder-mounted infrared missile, so that the average soldier in the field can effectively shoot down an airplane with a shoulder-fired missile. The basis of infrared electronic warfare is a result of the fact that every object that has any heat to it whatsoever emits an infrared signature. The greater the heat, the greater the signature. So these weapons are very effective when it comes to aircraft, because a jet engine makes a lot of heat and therefore produces a very large infrared signature. The relative signature that an object produces is based on three things: aspect angle, what angle is it being viewed from? If I'm an airplane and the infrared missile is looking at me from dead on, that is where my lowest IR signature is, because there's really no hot exhaust gases or anything when you're looking at it from the front view. Now, if I'm an airplane and I turn sideways, the hot exhaust gases coming out of the engine are now clearly viewable, and the signature is much more. And viewed from the rear, the signature of an airplane would be its greatest. Speed is also a factor when it comes to aircraft, because the faster they're moving through the atmosphere, the greater the friction, and therefore the greater the signature. They're warmer because they're heated up by the friction that the speed produces. Altitude comes into play because there's an attenuating effect of the atmosphere. At sea level, the atmosphere is much thicker. Attenuating the infrared signature of an object is much greater at sea level than it is in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, where the air is much thinner. Guidance units are designed to detect and home in on the IR radiation of an aircraft. The job of the seeker is to view the scene and output an estimated target position. The seeker has a relatively narrow view of the scene. It doesn't see in 360 degrees. It sees a spot out in space. And what it does is try to guide itself towards the hot object. So we obviously want to keep this from happening. How do we trick this missile into misinterpreting signals and therefore not, exploding our airplanes? And this is this basic principle of electronic warfare. How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we fool the technology that's trying to destroy us? For infrared protection, The primary countermeasure they're known as flares. A flare is a pyrotechnic device. It's designed to produce an IR signature that will decoy a missile away from its intended target. To do this, the flare has to trick the missile. It has to look like an airplane. It has to emit the same signature. It has to be in that same band of the spectrum. It must produce a larger amount of heat so that by default the missile locks itself onto the stronger heat source. And it must do this quickly. I mean, a flare is ejected from an airplane, and immediately the heat must rise quickly. Or if it happens out in space somewhere, it's already outside the field of view. We'll demonstrate what a flare looks like. If the computer screen is an enemy seeker head, this would be a flare. And the flare would track the light that I just turned on, like your eyes did. Burn time is very important to flares because they need to, produce a signature for a long enough time that it actually draws the missile off course. So that's flares. They're very simple. This technology has been around for a long, long time, and it's extremely effective. It is the primary, way to defeat heat-seeking missiles. And most of the planes in the Air Force inventory use some sort of flare to protect themselves from those. The other type of infrared electronic warfare protection is called infrared jamming. Now, this is much more expensive. In infrared jamming, you actively defeat the missile by taking a high-intensity laser and aiming it at the seeker head. Once again, if you're being infrared jammed, it would look something like this. Now, this technology is good at protecting very large, slow-moving targets. Big cargo planes. The system's actually employed on Air Force One. So it's good at protecting big, slow things that, a flare that they could launch multiple missiles at, and you'd run out of flares eventually. These systems are very expensive and heavy due to the large amount of processing equipment and laser generation. It's fascinating stuff. I don't know how they take a moving aircraft and through the use of 4 or 5 sensors determine the location of a missile head that's basically the size of a pop can, and then direct a laser onto that pop can from distances that are miles. It's fascinating stuff, and there's a lot of math involved with it. But it's very good, but it's very expensive, and the equipment's very heavy. So, in conclusion, electronic warfare is really protection. It's the suit of armor that keeps our airplanes safe and keeps the bad guys from doing us harm.